Warning, this guide features early strats for P11S. While the information in this video should be accurate enough to get you a kill, more optimized strats are almost certain to be discovered in the following weeks if they haven't already. Make sure to check the description below for links to any newer, better strats. Hi guys, and welcome to a Hector lecture guide to the fight P11S. This is Themis. Before we begin the fight, I just want to bring attention to a couple of markings on the ground that are really useful. These diamonds here are incredibly useful for knowing whether or not you're far enough in or out from attacks. The outer circle are max melee, but outside of the point-blank AoE attacks if the boss is perfectly middle, and the inside circle of diamonds are usually in enough for any of the donut attacks. Also make sure you're aware of these lines on the ground, as for a lot of the portal attacks that we're going to see, these lines determine the safe spots. For my guide, I'm going to be using the standard Kindred waymarks that I've seen most commonly in Party Finder, though my group actually used these instead, which are the same waymarks, same positions, just color rotated so that color partners have the same color. Use whichever waymarks your group's comfortable with. For this fight, you need to agree clock spots. These should be your supports on cardinals and your DPS on intercardinals. Your partner spots need to be on intercardinals, as a lot of times we're dodging a dash at the same time. For this, we have the supports rotate counterclockwise. We go for counterclockwise so that we can have our light party stacks east and west. Throughout this fight, the boss is going to be using light and dark a lot like they did in normal mode. Now, while the actual specifics of the mechanic is going to change based on the cast, one thing that's always going to be in common is whenever you see light, you know that this is going to end with light party stacks. And when you see dark, this is going to instead end with partner stacks. Light parties, dark duos. The fight begins with a raid-wide Unamia. This is going to hit pretty hard, but also comes with a bleed, so make sure to mitigate it to minimize the bleed damage. Next up is a tank buster targeting the top two players in aggro. First player hit in aggro is going to get light for both hits. Second in aggro gets dark for both hits. Because it comes with a vulnerability, you need to swap during to make sure you get hit by different elements. This is almost identical to P9S duality to death with two major differences. First, this doesn't cleave, so have your tanks both stack north so the boss doesn't rotate. And two, it hits hard. Healers watch out as there's a decent chance your tank will not be able to survive both hits, even with a lot of cooldowns. The next mechanic you see is Jury Overruling, and this begins the sort of bread and butter phase of this, where you're going to see all of its major mechanics in the light or the dark variation. Which version you get is random for each pull. Jury Overruling, the light version, always starts with everybody spread max melee at their spread spots. They get hit with these line AoE proteans, and then immediately need to come in at east and west to take light party stacks. A point-blank AoE is dropped where everybody was stood before, so make sure you move from where you were stood. The dark version of this is going to have the exact same line AoE proteans. However, everybody's going to drop a donut AoE where they're stood, and we need to get into partners. So tanks and healers rotate counterclockwise to stack with their partner. You'll see there's a safe spot stood directly where they were as long as you were all max melee. Next up is Upheld Overruling, which always comes with a tether. The light variant of this is going to target the tethered player for a stack damage, so everybody should stack perfectly middle, with the tethered player doing their best to stay exactly on the X in the middle so the boss doesn't move. After the stack, immediately run all the way out east and west for light parties. The dark variant of Upheld Overruling is always going to tether to a tank. This is a tank buster with a massive cleaving AoE that'll knock people away if they get hit by it, so the tank should go perfectly middle, and everybody else should go out in their partners. After the initial hit, which comes with a bleed, so definitely throw at least a short cooldown on this tanks, everybody should come in afterwards so that they can soak their pairs as there's a donut AoE with them. The final combo mechanic is Divisive Overruling. This always comes with a line AoE through the middle where the boss is facing, so main tanks make sure you're facing the boss north as much as you can for this. For the light variant, everybody rotates towards their light parties on east and west, and you just stay there max melee. You'll dodge the initial hit, you'll dodge the second hit, and you'll take your light parties. For the dark variant, instead, rotate to be with your partners, wait for the initial hit to go off, and move in afterwards as the second hit hits outside of that. When all of that's done, everybody should get middle as you're going to have a random healer targeted with sticks. This is a multi-hit stack marker. The first time you see it, it's going to hit for 5 hits, and every successive cast is going to hit for an additional hit, so mitigate this heavily as it hurts. When you've survived Styx, the boss is going to cast Arcane Revelation with either light or dark. Take note of this. This element that you see here is unsafe for the next mechanic, so we're going to be looking for light safe spots. Have your groups go east-west, and a bunch of portals appear on the outside. These appear on 2 random intercardinals. The patterns that you see are always going to be the same. One will be dark, light, light, dark. The other will be light, dark, dark, light. Since we have a dark Arcane Revelation, light AoEs are the safe spots. The simplest way to find the safe spot is find the pattern that has light in the middle. The safe spot will be directly in front of those and directly opposite those, so 2 and 4. If I overlay the dark line AoEs that are going to show up later, you can see that these are quite wide safe spots. The lines on the ground allow you to know exactly where to stand. Rotate into your safe spot, which will be near to where you originally stood. Make sure you're out of the AoE and max melee, and the boss is going to start to cast Dismissal Overruling. Dismissal Overruling always comes with a knockback at the start, so as soon as you see the cast, or even before it, pop knockback immunity. When the cast finishes, first the knockback happens, which we all just immune and ignore. Then the lasers go off, and then we sort whatever element Dismissal Overruling was. Because it was light this time, we're just going to stay out and soak light party stacks. Had Dismissal Overruling been dark instead, very similar. We split into our pairs in the safe spot. We ignore the knockback with knockback immunity. We wait for the lasers to go off, and then, and only then, do we dodge in for our pairs. Just be careful that you don't dodge in too soon. This is all fairly slow, so don't dodge into the lasers. You get a long time of just a bunch of autos before the boss casts Shadowed Messengers. Once again, have your group split east and west. 2 adds are going to spawn. We want to pay attention to those, but we can wait a second, because they're going to start casting a light and a dark version of the divisive mechanic, the one that cuts through the middle. Because we're split east and west, as long as we're max melee, everybody is already in a safe spot. Just like in the version that the boss does, the light one is about to get larger, whereas the dark one is going to be the safe spot afterwards. So every group is just going to rotate towards the dark path. Finally, the main tank needs to wait to go and join their group. As soon as they see where the light ad is, they should face the boss towards the light ad to make the dodges much simpler for the mechanic following. Once the boss starts casting Divisive Overruling, the boss's position is locked and the main tank can go join the group. Pay attention to the boss's element, it'll be important in a second. Wait for the initial dashes. Everybody rotates into the dark path. Some ads fall down, but we can ignore them for now. We dodge the second hit, and now we deal with the boss's Divisive Overruling. The boss should be cleaving away from us, because we faced him towards the light ad. And since this is the light version, we just stay out and take light party stacks. After this, you can now notice that 1 DPS and 1 tank have been tethered. These are doing that same tethered mechanic that we've seen previously. We need everybody to stack middle, except for the tank that is tethered. That tank needs to go out towards max melee on the edge, preferably in a consistent spot, so I'm going to have that tank always go north. The group gets a stack, the tank gets a tank buster, and we're about to get the in-out, so everyone should run towards the tank as we get a donut and a point-blank AoE at the same time. That's it. That's the whole of the mechanic. I'm just going to rewind to show you had we gotten the dark version of Divisive Overruling instead from the boss. Once again, main tank waits until the cast to go join their group. The first dashes go off. The group rotates into the dark path. Afterwards, since the boss is doing the dark version, we wait for the initial cleave, and then we go in with our partners. Everybody stacks middle except for the tank that's tethered, who's going to go all the way up north, max melee. Be aware, if the tank is max melee, the group needs to be at least middle or slightly south of middle, otherwise they're going to get clipped, and that's going to cause some wipes. Once the first hits go off, everybody runs towards the tank. Whichever combo you get, this is going to be followed immediately by a jury overruling, so everybody wants to head towards their clock spots. Once you go there, take the initial attack, and depending on the element, resolve either the light party stacks or pairs. This is going to be followed with a Styx that's going to hit for 6 hits this time, and then we get a new mechanic, Lightstream. Lightstream is always going to spawn these 3 sort of glowing light orbs on the outside in these exact spots. They're going to show line AoEs, and they're going to rotate. 2 of these will always rotate one direction, the third will rotate the other direction, but whether or not it's 2 clockwise or 2 counterclockwise is random. There is only going to be one of the outside pizza slices that's safe at the start, and so this is a puzzle to identify it. Tons of different ways to solve it. My preferred method is find the one that's rotating a different direction from the other two, in this case the counterclockwise one in the south, and go 2 spaces away from where it's rotating. It's pointing sort of left, so we're going to go 2 spaces to its right. That's our safe spot. Everybody heads over there. The boss is going to face towards, and the lasers go off. And now the boss is going to start to cast Divisive Overruling, and will almost always be facing perfectly where we were just stood. We need to get to the sides in our light parties. To do this, have Group 1 facing the boss start to inch their way left, Group 2 facing the boss inch their way right. Watching out for the lasers, there's 7 total hits. Since we've got the dark version of Divisive Overruling, we need to get into our pairs, and we're doing this sort of relative to how we would normally do it. Imagine that the boss was in the normal spot facing north, and you were on the side. If you were facing the boss, would you go left or go right? That's how we're splitting up into our pairs here. The boss does the initial dash, and then you need to dodge in with your pairs in this case. We get another raid wide with its bleed. Another Upheld Overruling. This is the tether version of the mechanic, so either stack middle for light or get out for the dark tank buster. In this case, light, so the groups get out for light parties afterwards. And now the big one. Dark and light is not necessarily the hardest mechanic, but it is probably the most confusing one. Dark and light is going to have every player targeted with either a light or a dark debuff. 1 light party, so a tank, a healer, and 2 DPS have dark, and the opposite have light. You're also going to have every support tethered to a DPS. Now, if you are tethered to the opposite color debuff, your tether is going to look like this, and this is signifying that you and your partner need to be close together for the whole mechanic. Get too far apart, big damage, you probably die. If you and your partner have the same color debuff, your tether is going to look like this instead. This is telling you to get away from each other, because if you are too close at any point in time, you are going to take big damage and probably die. Far enough apart is outside of the hitbox, directly opposite, max melee for safety. Finally, if you happen to already be resolving your tether, which is possible, your tether is going to look thin like this, like what H2 and R2 have, and your debuff will have changed. This signifies that you are in the correct spots. Everybody needs to get their tether to look like this in a couple of seconds, otherwise they're going to take damage and die. Now, we all need to get to spread spots that we're going to use throughout a bunch of different mechanics and dodges during this. To do this in an orderly fashion, supports are going to go towards cardinals, DPS are going to go towards intercardinals. We have whichever tank has the long tether always go north. If it's not the main tank, they should provoke and the other tank shirk so that the boss is facing north throughout the entirety of this mechanic. The DPS tethered to them goes to the intercardinal opposite. The healer with long tether goes directly south, and the DPS tethered to them goes to the intercardinal opposite. For the short tethers, healer needs to go to the east, and the tank needs to go to the west, with their partners just going next to them. The rest of light and dark is simply going to be doing some fairly easy dodges, but while making sure that we never unresolve our tethers. The first one is Arcane Revelation. The boss will show an element, in this case dark, and then spawn orbs on cardinals. 2 of these will be dark, 2 of these will be light. We need to go to the opposite element of the boss's cast, so light is safe. For this pattern here, short tethers would just slide out, and the long tethers would rotate clockwise to make sure that they don't ever accidentally shorten their tethers. Had we have gotten this pattern instead, here the long tethers are already next to a light orb, so they're just going to slide onto the one they're next to, and the short tethers instead rotate clockwise. However you deal with the dodge here, immediately afterwards head back towards your spread spots. Now, we have a jury overruling to deal with. That's the spread into either partners or light party stacks, and I'm going to show you 2 different versions of how to deal with both the dark and the light way. The standard Kindred version of dark has everybody starting on their waymarks. After the initial proteans go off, the short tethers are just going to go all the way out east and west. The long tether supports are going to rotate clockwise to stack on their partner. This causes you to lose some uptime, so if you'd prefer the Kindred Uptime version, in this case, everybody's going to start on their waymarks for the initial proteans. After the line AoEs go off, this time, the short tethers are going to rotate onto one of the spots where a long tether currently is, and the long tethers rotate to be on the other one. I'm going to show this with everybody going clockwise, though I've seen some that do counterclockwise to keep light parties together. For the light version, standard Kindred version has everybody going on their waymarks, but then the long tethers disengage before the cast finishes. This leaves a bigger safe spot for the stacks afterwards, For this, you need your long tethers to just go back in between their waymarks, and the short tethers need to rotate counterclockwise. This is the only time you do a counterclockwise rotation, but it's to make sure the healers stay separate. If you don't like the disengage or the healers having to go counterclockwise if they're short tether, then you could do the uptime version. This is everybody just stay on their waymark, no disengage, and at the end, everybody rotates clockwise to get towards east-west, with short tethers just going out on their side. If you are at A and C before this goes off, you're probably going to need sprint as the timing can be quite tight. However you deal with this, I recommend having at least the current main tank go back to their spread spots, or have, in this I show here, everyone go back to their spread spots. The boss will cast Divisive Overruling. This is going to be a half arena cleave. To deal with the light version, all we do is we have the short tethers go out on their side, and the long tethers rotate clockwise. Stay out, and soak your light party stacks together. If we get the dark variant instead, everybody's still going to rotate clockwise, but everybody's only going to rotate a little bit clockwise. So short tethers rotate a little bit clockwise and go out. Long tethers rotate clockwise. The hardest part of this one is right here. You might be tempted to just walk horizontally straight in, but if the long tethers do that, they're likely to get too close, activate their tethers, and kill each other. So instead, when going in, long tethers should rotate around the hitbox back into the safe spot to make sure their tethers stay long. If you've done all this, don't make the most obvious mistake here. You are still tethered, don't move. Wait until the boss casts Emissary's Will, which gets rid of all of the tethers and debuffs, and now you're free to move wherever you want to. With Dark and Light out of the way, we get another Styx, this time for 7 hits, another Tank Buster to deal with the same way as before, and Dark Current. For Dark Current, I split the groups east and west. 3 AoEs are going to appear. The 2 on the outside are going to either appear north-south or east-west, and we're about to have lines appear that show which way those are going to rotate. From our east-west spots, our groups are going to adjust to wherever is going to be safe the longest. So here we see a counterclockwise rotation, so the groups rotate to 1 and 3, as that's going to be the last places hit with AoEs. We're currently in spread spots because the boss casts Blinding Light, which puts a spread marker on everyone. For these spreads, this is just the tank healer nearer to the AoE that's going to rotate, the DPS further away, with tanks and melees in and healer ranged out. The AoEs are going to go off. After 3 hits, the spreads are going to activate. And from here, you just need to get to the next intercardinal past where the AoE started. And from here, you can stop moving. This will be always followed with a Jury Overruling, so get back to your clock spots and resolve whatever element you see. In this case, light, so the groups stack and light parties in. We now get another random Upheld Overruling. This is the tether mechanic. And a random Divisive Overruling. This is going to be with the line AoE dash through the middle. Another raid wide. And then the final big mechanic, Letter of the Law. This is probably the longest and most complicated mechanic and will probably be the hardest one for you to be able to get the clear. For Letter of the Law, I have tanks start in the north and the rest of the group start in the south. Some adds will fall down, but we don't care about where they are or what they're doing. We could ignore them for now. The boss will cast Twofold Revelation and show either light or dark. Just like the Arcane Revelations of before, whatever element we see here is unsafe for the entirety of the rest mechanic, so we need to be looking for dark safe spots this time. When it finishes, orbs, portals, and tethers appear. First, to deal with the tether, the only thing that matters is the tank who doesn't get a tether should immediately go join the party south. We're looking for dark safe spots. I personally recommend start by finding the correct orb. You might just be able to go out at your side, or you might have to rotate clockwise for this. And from this spot, rotate towards the safe portals. Dark is safe, and middle dark is on 3 currently, so the groups are going to rotate towards 3 with the main tank rotating towards 1. You only need to step a tiny little bit towards it, use the lines on the ground to be able to know if you're far enough. The boss will cast Heart of Judgment. This will spawn towers, but the end of the cast almost perfectly aligns with when all of the AoEs explode. You may be tempted to go straight for those towers. Don't. We need to resolve our tethers first. Have the group stay out, nowhere further in than max melee to take a stack, while the tank who's tethered should try to get near to middle so that it's easier for the next dodge. The group gets a stack, the tank gets a tank buster, and just like before, everyone needs to run towards the tank to dodge the in and out. Once the in and out are dodged, We can get ready to soak our towers. We'll do these true north style, so you're just going to your usual partner spots, assuming the boss was facing north for any of the previous mechanics. The ads on the outside are going to appear, and they're going to have colors, but you can focus on your towers for now. Soak your tower, and as soon as it's soaked, immediately have your groups run towards east and west out. From here, this is very similar to Shadowed Messengers. The initial dashes go off. The boss is going to start casting Divisive Overruling, so while rotating into the dark safe spot, we're going to pop Knockback Immunity. We dodge the rest of those. Divisive Overruling goes off, we've immuned the knockback, and because it was the light version, we just stay out with our light parties, and so resolve the rest of it there. Had it been the dark version of Divisive Overruling, the only difference is our pairs would have gone in at the end. Everything from this point onward is repeated mechanics. You get a Styx with 8 hits. You get another Lightstream, which spawns those spinning lights. Exactly the same as it was before, even follows with the same Divisive Overruling. You get another Tank Buster. You get another Jury Overruling. And an Unamia Raid Wide, before the boss is finally going to cast Ultimate Verdict. This serves as the Enrage for the fight. Kill the boss before the cast goes off, or it's game over. That's everything you need to know for P11S. I hope you found this useful. Apologies in advance if I've not shown your preferred dark and light strategy. I know there's a lot of different strats going around, and I just tried to show the ones that I thought were most popular and what my group used. Let me know in the comment section if you think there's any dark and lights that need a mini guide or any other mechanic that has an easier way to solve it. Thanks so much for watching. Take care.